Right, hi guys, it is Dan here. I meant to do this review a few days ago, but it's been really busy working on the orchard the last few days. But anyway, here I am, and today I'm going to be talking about Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Now, this is the first entry in his sort of like big epic fantasy series, the Stormlight Archive. And Brandon Sanderson he's a hugely prolific and popular fantasy author. And I think this series is basically meant to be his like magnum opus. So inevitably it is just like a huge book with loads going on. In fact, it is so big that here in the UK they actually split it into 2 volumes, as you can see. Now, the story itself takes place on a continent called Roshar, on a different planet to as like a made-up fantasy planet, obviously. And we mainly follow 3 characters. So you've got like Dalinar, who is this powerful nobleman and warrior from the kingdom of Elethkar. Yeah. Then you've got Shallan, who is a minor noblewoman from, I think, the same kingdom or possibly a neighbouring kingdom. Yeah, possibly a neighbouring kingdom. And then you've got Kaladin, is the other dude, and he is a slave who is kind of forced to fight for the Alethi armies as this like special kind of support troop that is just consistently placed in a ton of danger. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the actual plot because it's pretty convoluted, and also this is like the first book in what is intended to be, I think, a 10-book series. So basically there's like a load of setup of what's going to be, I assume, the main conflicts in the series, and there's a load of background for the characters. There's a ton of world building, and you get introduced to like the magic systems. Brandon Sanderson is really big on his magic systems, so there's a lot of introduction to that. But, although there is a lot of setup, I will say that Sanderson does do a really good job of providing, complete narrative arcs for all 3 of the main characters by the end of the book. So, it's quite a satisfying read in that sense. But anyway, yeah, so I won't give you a synopsis for this really. But, I guess the question then is, is this any good? And tentatively, I'll say yes. All right. I did definitely enjoy this overall, and I got through it really quickly, considering that it is like over 1,100 pages. I think. I'm not sure it had to be that long, but anyway, I did get through it really quick, considering. But what I will also say is that I did have a few issues with it, and I'll talk about them in a little bit. Yeah, I know that Sanderson is he's a really popular author, but there's a couple of elements of his writing style that I just don't necessarily get on with. But fortunately, these were outweighed by the positives, so I'll go into them first, I reckon. For me, the best thing about this book is just how much of a grand scale it is all on. And the fact that grand scale is combined with loads of really thoughtful detail. The world is huge, and you can also tell though that has been really well thought through. He's clearly put a lot of time into thinking about this. Everything from the history of the world, the geography, the climate, the economy, and how all this interacts as well. It's all of this has been considered, and it all meshes together to create a really believable world. In a fantasy sense, in as much as a fantasy world can be believable. Yeah, I mean, it really is some of the most well considered world building that I've seen in, since we're talking like Tolkien levels of quality of world building. I think if it progresses as it has in this book throughout the series. and that is the feeling that I get from this book. Actually, is that Sanderson, like I say, this is kind of, I think, supposed to be his magnum opus, and what he's trying to do, I think, again, is write a classic. It feels like he's trying to write a classic of the fantasy genre. You know, he's wrote a whole bunch of different books. I've not read like that many of them really. I've read the Mistborn series and his entries into the Wheel of Time series, but this one feels like he's trying to put down a marker and say, you know, yeah, I am a real, you know, I'm a real big fantasy author. You know, this is his attempt at a classic. What else? Yeah, for the most part as well, Sanderson, he paces the revelations about various aspects of like Roshar's history, and stuff like the magic systems really well, with with one notable exception that I will talk about in the negative section. And it's really intriguing trying to piece it all together as a reader, you know, how the history of the world is affecting what the characters are doing now. Yeah, that's really intriguing. And as I touched on before, you know, the narrative arcs for the main characters were pretty satisfying from like a writing point of view, which is not always the case in the first book of a series. So he gets, you know, good marks for that as well. Well done, Brandon. But as I said, I do have a few little niggles that did kind of detract from a little bit from my reading experience. Number one is the opening sequence. Oh, that was that was pretty terrible. It's like it's not one of the main characters. It's just this random dude. It's like an interlude, but I guess a prologue. But there are interludes between each section of the book's split into 5 parts, and there's interludes between each of them. So this was one of the characters who's in these interludes. So he's not a main character, doesn't appear that often. But yeah, my problem with it was that Sanderson basically explains in way too much detail, in way too much detail, how one of the magic systems work, because there's a few magic systems in the book. But yeah, it was a real info dump, basically right at the start of the book, and that was a big turn off for me actually, and it made me, it kind of gave me sort of like negative feelings about the book straight off the bat, which is a shame because actually it recovered really well at points. But and the other thing was it was totally unnecessary to do that as well, because this magic system that you then basically don't hear about it for 800 or 900 pages, so there was no need to learn about it in the prologue in the first place. So that was a big mistake, I think, on Sanderson's part, in my opinion anyway. Number two reason why I was slightly annoyed was there's these 2 characters, right? Shallan, who's one of the main characters, and then this other guy called Hoyd or the Wit, and he's like more of a minor character, but he appears, you know, regularly. And they're supposed to be funny, right? In a kind of clever, acerbic, sarcastic kind of way. But the problem is that they're not. He tries to write them as funny, but he just does not write funny dialogue for them. They basically just come across as like puerile and snarky and childish in the way that they're speaking to people a lot of the time. It was really quite annoying to read their dialogue for me, anyway. Maybe it's just my sense of humour didn't, you know, mesh with, you know, what Brandon Sanderson was trying to do, but I found it quite annoying. Yeah, not much more to say on that. Number 3, third annoying thing was there's this big war going on between the Alethi and this other race, the Parshendi, and who are actually really interesting. They're really quite an original aspect of the book that I enjoyed later on when you find out a bit more about them. But anyway, this war is like a main plot arc throughout the book, really important. And the problem was that well, let me explain to you how this war works, because it's not like a normal war where you're just fighting big battles. You've got the Alethi on one side of this big plain, and then the Parshendi on the other side. And this plain has been like, it's called the Shattered Plains, and it's just made up of these plateaus that have these huge chasms in between them. And the Parshendi can kind of, they're this, they're non-human, and they can jump from over these chasms. They can jump really far, whereas the humans have to bridge the chasms. But obviously, the Parshendi can come along and destroy their bridges. So what they do is they get these slaves to carry temporary bridges to the chasms, so that then the army can cross and fight the Parshendi. And they're not just trying to seek each other out and fight each other. You've got these big monsters called chasm fiends who climb up onto the plateaus and pupate is the word that is used in the book, which sounds like they just turn into these big chrysalis type things, which means that then the army that gets there first can open these big chrysalis things, and inside these creatures' hearts are these huge gemstones that have magical properties. So they're like a big treasure that both armies are trying to get. So this war basically consists of the Alethi and the Parshendi racing each other to these plateaus whenever these big gems appear on them, which to me, it sounds like an arcade game from the 80s. And basically, yeah, I didn't like it, because in my head it was just like being on an arcade machine and playing a game. It seemed a bit silly, and that is a matter of personal taste. I get that, but that was just the feeling that it gave me, and I wasn't a big fan of it. Now, number four. This is the last reason. This is my last annoying thing, the last negative thing I've got to say about it, right? And just remember, overall, I thought this book was, overall positive. But number four negative thing. Sanderson writes characters who have really strong motivations and backstories. Now hold on, I hear you cry. That's a good thing, isn't it? And yes, that is a good thing. But I just don't think he handles it with any delicacy. It's like he knows that a well-written character has strong motivations and a backstory that affects their decisions, which is great. But then he just bludgeons you round the head with it to make sure that you get it. He doesn't trust that the reader will be able to infer the motivations. He just really hammers it into you. Especially with Kaladin, where you get all these flashback chapters of his childhood and adolescence, which honestly I thought were totally unnecessary and pretty boring, and actually could have just, if he'd just not had the flashback things and just included a few sentences, a few paragraphs here and there that let you know these backstory elements that influenced Kaladin's motivations, I think the novel would have been better. It wouldn't have had to be 1100 pages. He could have completely cut out all of them and probably took it down to 800 or 900 pages, which is still long. So that's, if you want a long book, that's still long. And I think it would have. Overall, the pacing was generally pretty good, but those sections really slowed it down, and I thought if he got rid of them, the pacing would have been much better. Like I say, I did actually enjoy reading this book a fair amount, in spite of the weaknesses that I have talked about. I'm definitely going to get hold of a copy of the second one in the series, because I am actually really intrigued about the world that Sanderson has created here. Like, the world building, as I say, was excellent. And I want to know some more about the history of it, because, like I say, very intriguing. And if some of those weaknesses that I've talked about are dealt with and don't appear or appear to a reduced extent in the remaining books of the series, then it could be really fantastic. But yeah, let me see. There we go. There's the first one. But yeah, anyway, after the Way of Kings, in my opinion, this is pretty good, but it has tons of potential. It's got the potential, if the series progresses, to be really fantastic, but at the moment it's only potential. So yeah, that's it. Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It's pretty good. So yeah, bye.